Hello everybody, my name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today we'll be diving into Josh McDowell and why he is a coward. And yet, we also need to talk about how Big Eva is using this situation as an object lesson on how to respond to allegations of racism. So that's what we're talking about today, and that's why that latter part is why we're talking about this now after the story's kind of been over for like a week or two. But Ed Stetzer wrote an article in USA Today because, if you're a wolf, you can get published in a mainstream media publication like USA Today. So with that said, that's why we're going to talk about this issue. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel. That really helps with the magical YouTube algorithms. And let's roll tape with the supposedly racist comments.
It's not just the equal of opportunity, and I don't believe. Everybody says, well, blacks, whites, everyone have the equal opportunity to make it in America. No, they don't, folks. I do not believe blacks, African Americans, and many of the minorities have equal opportunity. Why? Most of them grow up in families where there's not a big emphasis on education, security. You can do anything you want. You can change the world. If you work hard, you will make it. So many African Americans don't have those privileges like I was brought up with. My folks weren't very rich. In fact, they were a poor farming family. But the way I was raised, I have advantages in life. Ingrained into me, you can do it. Get your education. Get a job. Change the world. And that makes it in different opportunities.
Now, I don't agree with everything Josh McDowell said in that clip. I don't agree with everything that he said. Do I think he's mostly right? Yes, I do think he's mostly right. He's more right than he's wrong. But it wasn't a racist clip, and he's being accused of racism for saying something that he believed to be true. And what he believed to be true was that skin color wasn't the issue, that culture was the issue. So he's attributing disparity to culture, and I think he would probably have a lot more of a woke explanation for the cultural aspect than I would. But he's not. But, racism is attributing skin color to these things, not attributing culture to these outcomes. It's attributing racism's about, you're in jail because you're black, or you're dumb because you're not white, or something like that. That's racism. What Josh McDowell was doing was explaining disparities by talking about culture, talking about parenting, talking about the values that people grow up with. And that's not racism. And for the allegations that, for people to call that racist, they have an agenda. They don't want to talk about the truth. They don't want to talk about the truth. That's why they are so up in arms about this. And Josh McDowell is a coward for apologizing for that. That was nothing to apologize for. And here's the thing about cancel culture mobs. They smell weakness. That's what motivates them to come after you. If they think they can cancel you, they come after you because they smell weakness. So if you apologize, you not only reward the mob, but you encourage them to come after you again and again and again. There will never be any winning with the mob. There won't never be any satisfying this Marxist mob, because you have already given them an insatiable taste of control over you, and they want more of that. So there's never any satiating their lust for power, and you are a coward if you bend to their will. That's always true. And those comments were nothing to apologize for. And just an example of someone bowing and getting canceled multiple times is Drew Brees. Is he a former quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, or is he just injured this year? Either way, longtime quarterback. Basically, the mob came after him again after he apologized for not taking part in, but associating with the people behind Bring Your Bible to School Day because they hold a biblical view of sexuality. That's the type of Christian Drew Brees is. And then he would later have to apologize for not being woke enough on the whole George Floyd issue. So again, he has his master, and his master is money, that's for sure. So let's dive into this article by Ed Stetzer. And this is Ed Stetzer trying to use Josh McDowell as basically trying to walk on him to push this woke agenda. And Ed Stetzer, if you're not familiar, he was the one doing the interview with Francis Collins that I did 2 videos on. So that was Ed Stetzer giving that interview. Ed Stetzer is like the editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine, which is your church growth guru magazine that publishes a lot of trite articles that are aggregated from original sources because they aren't talented. And he's also the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center executive director, whatever that does. I'm sure it's a lofty paycheck. So this is Ed Stetzer's article in USA Today, and I just want to read this paragraph, and then we'll go through the more woke agenda stuff. In this context, the evangelical movement embarked on its newest episode recently when evangelist and writer Josh McDowell stepped away from his ministry after making comments about race on September 18th at a meeting of the American Association of Christian Counselors. Now, again, that was cowardice, and we should actually cancel him for being a coward. I'm not against canceling people for being a coward because they're unwilling to stand up for what they believe in. If you're not going to hold the line, then don't get in the fight. That is a biblical command to the Israelites in the book of Deuteronomy, in their rules for war section, where it talks about send the cowards home. That's a biblical command. And we see that again in Judges 7, where the 300 are selected to fight. And like the first way they narrow it down and win of the crowd, I believe, was to send the cowards home. So with that said, Ed Stetzer's trying to use this as an opportunity to push critical race theory. So in an age of denial, McDowell's apology is an instructive model on owning the causality of our own words and actions in other people's harm. First of all, no harm came from his words. If you were personally affected by his words, I don't know how you live and not just bleed out every single day from being harmed by other people's words. Yet, the episode may be an instructive example of the broader and often cynical challenge the evangelical movement faces in lasting progress around issues of race. So, again, this is Ed Stetzer trying to use Josh McDowell as an object lesson to impose effeminacy on the church so that he can critical race theory the church. And here's his biblical model for how we need to be moving forward with this. And it's altering the power dynamics to learn. And note, this is where we get into heavy Marxism here, is this notion of power dynamics and all that. Because what is cultural Marxism? It's talking about power dynamics between a proletariat and a bourgeoisie type dynamic in cultural elements like race, the whites and the non-whites, stuff like that. This isn't complicated stuff. If you can understand Marxism, if you can understand communism, you can understand critical race theory. Don't let these academic elitists tell you otherwise. Listening without empowering others to speak authoritatively will never produce real change. To truly learn requires that white evangelical leaders shift the dynamic of power existing within our networks, institutions, and relationships, no Oxford comma, so as to ensure brothers and sisters of color can speak into our lives. It's not enough to simply be quiet. We need to listen and learn. And this is that whole postmodernist mentality that we need to listen to other people's experience in order to learn rather than look at data, because people can lie and people lie all the time. So we need to look at data, which, isn't perfect. You can't make all your inferences from data, but anecdotes you can't make. You can make corroborating inferences based on anecdotes, but you cannot make complete understandings based on anecdotes. That is foolishness. But, this is about trying to emotionally manipulate you into accepting critical race theory, because who are the voices of color that they're going to be platforming, that they're going to be promoting? It's going to be the woke ones, rather than the silent majority, or the ones who, are just like everyone else. Like, again, I think that white evangelicals have a lot more in common with black evangelicals than these people want you to think. They want to create a division that's characterized by woke black pastors and woke and then conservative white pastors. They want to highlight that disparity between an Eric Mason and a John MacArthur. I don't know. I'm just picking a name that comes to my head. They want to highlight a dynamic like that, or a staunch contrast like that, and that's just not going to do it. It's not realistic enough. So this is where he talks about how we need to embrace parts of critical race theory, or that it's okay to embrace parts of critical race theory. The greatest obstacles to evangelicalism are internal to the movement. In writing on the evangelical movement for nearly 20 years, a recurring truth is that the biggest problem is not from external subversion. To be sure, there are many non-Christian leaders or ideologies that threaten to co-opt the mission of the church. However, the greatest obstacles to the flourishing of the evangelical movement, particularly in regards to substantively engaging our failings on race, have arisen from within. Actually, the greatest enemies within the church are the wolves like Ed Stetzer. Ed Stetzer's a wolf. He's been hustling the church for decades, trying to make that cash, and make that cash he certainly has. So with that said, let's continue. Few events capture this truth as much as the debate around critical race theory. As with broader American society, recent evangelical discussions of race have been dominated by the specter of CRT. Efforts by some evangelicals to weaponize words like CRT and social justice as buzzwords for dangerous ideology only fortify the barricades and cripple fruitful discussion among Orthodox believers about the existence of systemic sin and injustice. Indeed, McDowell's comments stem from his participation in this criticism. So again, he's being used as an object lesson to say him apologizing and becoming more woke is a good thing. No, he is a coward. Josh McDowell is a coward, and he deserves no quarter as far until he repents of his cowardice. As far as I'm concerned, his ministry is discredited until he repents of that. With that said, social justice is an inherently political term. It is inherent to identity politics. That's what the whole part about social is. So social justice is not biblical justice. see why he thinks that's such an innocuous term. No, it's not innocuous. It's always inherently political. It's an inherently politically charged term, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. Critical race theory, likewise, is inherently charged. Now, the danger that you, as a believer, need to watch out for is when people like Ed Stetzer try to teach critical race theory under a different name. So you got to be mindful of that. So definitely be mindful of that. When church leaders reduce complex ideas to simplistic buzzwords, the end result is always irrational fear and suspicion rather than honest dialogue. There are legitimate concerns about CRT, and I and many others have been discussing CRT's challenges and shortcomings. Christians would be wise to reflect carefully on it, as well as any academic tool, and how it intersects or conflicts with their faith. But leaders need to recognize how this simplistic and excessive repeated attacks has yet again thwarted any efforts to engage issues of race. And before you attack what I just said, make sure you read the next point. I don't really need to read the next point. I've read it. It's not really important, in my opinion. So with that said, this is him trying to bash you for not being open to the idea of critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is part of a separate religion, one that the evangelical dark web has consistently called long before George Floyd, this social justice gospel. This was long before George Floyd, had nothing to do with George Floyd. And we knew back then that critical race theory was antithetical to the gospel. It was antithetical to scripture. It was antithetical to objective truth. All these things, all these reasons are why we cannot permit CRT to be used, taught in the church. And if that thwarts dialogue with certain people, then so be it. That is just collateral damage as far as I'm concerned. No quarter for critical race theory. This is an ideology that we need to be set out to destroy, and I mean destroy, and no quarter for it. No quarter. So once again, let's just return to the original topic of Josh McDowell, and I think he's a coward, and he has no credibility until he repents of his cowardice. So that's all I got to say about that issue. Don't let yourself be used by Ed Stetzer in this way. You don't want to be like that. So don't be a coward. So that's all I got to say about that. My name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web, and if you want to support this kind of content, in addition to subscribing to the channel, also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org, linked in the description below, and hit the join section. You can join our Patreon-like system because Patreon censors, so we don't use Patreon. So be sure to join that. Let me know what you think about what I think in the comment section below, and I will catch you on the next one.